Question 1. When conducting an internal audit of an organization's anti-bribery management system compliant with ISO 37001-2016, what is the single most indispensable component of any reported finding, whether it identifies a nonconformity or an area for improvement? Option A. A detailed description of the potential financial impact of the identified issue on the organization's bottom line. Option B. A comprehensive list of all personnel involved in the process being audited, regardless of their direct relation to the finding. Option C. Specific, verifiable evidence that substantiates the conclusion drawn about the system's performance. Option D. A proposed corrective action plan developed by the auditor prior to report submission. The correct answer is C. Specific, verifiable evidence that substantiates the conclusion drawn about the system's performance. Explanation. The core of an internal audit report is to communicate findings, including nonconformities, observations, and opportunities for improvement, in a clear, concise, and objective manner. For an ISO 37001-2016 internal auditor, this means accurately reflecting the status of the anti-bribery management system's conformity with the standards requirements and the organization's own policies and procedures. A critical aspect of reporting is providing sufficient, relevant, and reliable evidence to support each finding. This evidence forms the basis for any corrective actions that may be required. Without specific, verifiable evidence, a finding lacks credibility and cannot effectively drive improvement. For example, if an auditor notes a potential weakness in due diligence processes for third parties, the report must detail the specific instances reviewed, the criteria against which they were assessed, e.g., Clause 7.1. 2 of ISO 37001, the organization's third-party due diligence policy, and the objective evidence gathered, e.g., incomplete documentation for a specific vendor, lack of documented risk assessment for another. The objective is to enable the auditee and management to understand the root cause and implement effective remedial measures. Therefore, the most crucial element for an internal auditor's report, particularly concerning findings, is the presence of concrete, verifiable evidence that substantiates the conclusions drawn about the anti-bribery management system's performance. Question 2. When auditing an organization's anti-bribery risk assessment process in accordance with ISO 37001-2016, what specific aspect of the methodology is most critical for an internal auditor to evaluate to ensure the assessment effectively informs the selection of appropriate controls? Option A. The extent to which the risk assessment documentation includes a comprehensive list of all potential bribery scenarios, regardless of their perceived probability. Option B. The systematic approach used to determine the likelihood and impact of bribery across all relevant business relationships, geographical areas, and business activities. Option C. The frequency with which the risk assessment is reviewed and updated, assuming the initial methodology was sound. Option D. The number of employees who participated in the risk assessment workshop, irrespective of their understanding of bribery risks. The correct answer is B. The systematic approach used to determine the likelihood and impact of bribery across all relevant business relationships, geographical areas, and business activities. Explanation. The core of ISO 37001-2016 risk assessment for bribery lies in identifying, analyzing, and evaluating potential bribery risks specific to an organization's operations, including its business relationships, geographical locations, and business activities. Clause 8.3 of the standard mandates this process. When considering the effectiveness of a risk assessment, an internal auditor must look beyond mere identification of potential bribery scenarios. The analysis phase requires a deeper dive into the likelihood of such scenarios occurring and the potential impact if they do. Impact assessment in this context is not solely financial. It encompasses reputational damage, legal penalties, and operational disruption. The evaluation phase then prioritizes these risks based on the analysis, guiding the selection of appropriate controls. Therefore, the most comprehensive approach to assessing the effectiveness of a risk assessment under ISO 37001-2016 involves examining the robustness of the methodology used to determine the likelihood and impact of bribery across all relevant organizational facets, as this directly informs the adequacy of the implemented controls and the overall anti-bribery posture. This includes considering factors like the nature of third-party relationships, the transparency of transactions, and the presence of red flags indicative of bribery. The auditor's role is to ensure that the assessment process is systematic, documented, and leads to actionable insights for risk mitigation. Question 3. An internal auditor is preparing to assess the effectiveness of a multinational corporation's third-party due diligence process, a critical component of its ISO 37001-2016 compliant anti-bribery management system. The organization operates in sectors with high corruption indices and frequently engages agents and distributors in various jurisdictions. Which of the following areas of organizational understanding would be most crucial for the auditor to investigate to ensure the due diligence process adequately addresses identified bribery risks, considering the specific operational context and relevant legal frameworks like the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act? Option A. The historical financial performance of the company and its competitors, and the general market perception of ethical business practices in the regions of operation. Option B. The specific training modules provided to employees on general compliance topics and the company's overall cybersecurity protocols. Option C. The organizational chart of the Human Resources Department and the frequency of internal audits conducted on financial statements. Option D. The detailed methodologies and risk-based criteria used to categorize third parties for due diligence, the escalation procedures for high-risk findings, and the integration of due diligence outcomes into contractual agreements and ongoing monitoring. Correct answer is D. The detailed methodologies and risk-based criteria used to categorize third parties for due diligence, the escalation procedures for high-risk findings, and the integration of due diligence outcomes into contractual agreements and ongoing monitoring. Explanation. An internal auditor's effectiveness in assessing an organization's anti-bribery management system, ABAMS, hinges on their thorough understanding of the auditee's specific context and operational processes. ISO 37001-2016, Clause 4. 1. Understanding the organization and its context, and Clause 4. 2. Understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties are foundational. Clause 4. 1. Mandates identifying external and internal issues relevant to the organization's purpose and its strategic direction that may affect its ability to achieve the intended results of the ABAMS. Clause 4. 2. Requires determining interested parties relevant to the ABAMS and their requirements. Clause 7. 1. Resources and Clause 7. 2. Competence are also critical as they relate to the resources needed to establish, implement, maintain, and improve the ABAMS, and ensuring personnel are competent. When auditing the due diligence process for third parties, Clause 7. 3. An auditor must understand how the organization identifies and assesses bribery risks associated with its business relationships. This involves examining the criteria used for risk assessment, the depth of due diligence performed based on risk levels, and how the results of due diligence inform decisions about engaging or continuing relationships with third parties. A key aspect of this is understanding the organizational structure, reporting lines, and decision-making processes related to third-party engagement, as these directly influence the implementation and effectiveness of due diligence controls. The auditor must also consider the specific industry, geographic locations, and types of transactions involved, as these factors shape the bribery risk landscape and the appropriate controls. Therefore, the auditor's ability to map the organization's business processes to the ABAMS requirements, particularly concerning third-party engagement and risk management, is paramount. This includes understanding how procurement, sales, and partnership agreements are managed, and how anti-bribery clauses are integrated and monitored. The auditor must also be aware of relevant anti-bribery legislation, such as the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, or the UK Bribery Act, and how the organization's processes align with these legal obligations. Without this contextual understanding, an auditor might overlook critical control weaknesses or misinterpret the significance of identified nonconformities. The auditor's role is to verify that the ABAMS is effectively integrated into the organization's overall business operations and risk management framework. Question 4. Consider an internal audit of a multinational corporation's ISO 37001-2016 anti-bribery management system. The organization operates in several countries with varying regulatory landscapes and has recently expanded its third-party agent network in a region identified as having a high propensity for facilitation payments. Which of the following factors would be the most crucial initial consideration when defining the audit scope for the procurement department, aiming to assess compliance with Clause 7? 2. Due diligence on persons and activities associated with the organization. Option A. The most recent bribery risk assessment, findings specifically highlighting risks related to third-party engagement in the new operational region, and the organization's stated commitment to scrutinizing high-risk relationships. Option B. The historical audit reports from previous years, focusing on general financial control weaknesses unrelated to bribery. Option C. The total number of employees within the procurement department and the total value of contracts managed by the department annually. Option D. The availability of the latest version of the organization's employee code of conduct, irrespective of its specific anti-bribery provisions. The correct answer is A. The most recent bribery risk assessment, findings specifically highlighting risks related to third-party engagement in the new operational region, and the organization's stated commitment to scrutinizing high-risk relationships. Explanation. When planning an internal audit for an ISO 37001/2016 compliant anti-bribery management system, an auditor must consider various factors to ensure the audit is effective and efficient. The scope of the audit, which defines the boundaries of the review, is a critical element. It dictates which processes, departments, locations, and specific requirements of the standard will be examined. Determining the scope involves understanding the organization's bribery risk assessment results, the identified high-risk areas, the commitment from top management, and the specific objectives of the audit itself. For instance, if the organization has identified its procurement department as a high-risk area due to its interaction with third parties and significant financial transactions, the audit scope would likely include a detailed examination of procurement processes, third-party due diligence, and related financial controls. The auditor must also consider the availability of resources, such as time and personnel, and the competence of the audit team. The audit plan should clearly articulate the audit criteria, which are the set of policies, procedures, and requirements against which the audit evidence will be compared. This includes relevant clauses of ISO 37001/2016, applicable legal and regulatory requirements, such as the UK Bribery Act or the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, depending on the organization's operations and the organization's own anti-bribery policies and procedures. The auditor's understanding of the organization's business context, including its industry, geographic locations, and operational complexity, is also paramount in defining an appropriate and focused audit scope. The ultimate goal is to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to determine whether the anti-bribery management system conforms to the standard and is effectively implemented and maintained. Question 5. An internal auditor for a multinational corporation is tasked with evaluating the effectiveness of the company's third-party due diligence process as mandated by its ISO 37001/2016 compliant anti-bribery management system. The population consists of 5,000 third-party due diligence files, categorized by assessed risk levels: 1,000 high risk, 2, 500 medium risk, and 1, 500 low risk. The audit objective is to determine the extent to which due diligence procedures for high-risk relationships have been consistently applied, which sampling technique would be most appropriate to ensure adequate representation of all risk categories, with a particular focus on the high-risk segments, to provide a robust assessment of compliance. Option A. Convenience sampling, selecting due diligence files that are readily accessible and easy to review, irrespective of risk classification. Option B. Cluster sampling, randomly selecting a few risk categories and then auditing all due diligence files within those selected categories. Option C. Systematic sampling, selecting every /NTH/ record from the complete list of due diligence files without regard to risk level. Option D. Stratified sampling, dividing the population into risk-based strata and then sampling within each stratum. The correct answer is D. Stratified sampling, dividing the population into risk-based strata and then sampling within each stratum. Explanation. The core principle behind selecting an appropriate sampling technique for an ISO 37001/2016 internal audit of the anti-bribery management system is to ensure that the sample selected is representative of the entire population of transactions or activities being audited, thereby allowing for reliable conclusions to be drawn about the effectiveness of controls. When considering a scenario where an auditor needs to examine a large volume of third-party due diligence records, and the objective is to assess compliance with the organization's policy on assessing high-risk relationships, the auditor must choose a method that balances efficiency with the need for assurance. Stratified sampling is particularly effective in this context because it allows the auditor to divide the population into homogeneous subgroups, or strata, based on relevant characteristics. In this case, the risk level of the third parties, e.g., high, medium, low, would serve as an excellent basis for stratification. By stratifying the due diligence records by risk level, the auditor can then apply sampling methods within each stratum, ensuring that each risk category is adequately represented in the sample. This approach is superior to simple random sampling when the population is heterogeneous, as it guarantees that critical subgroups, like high-risk third parties, which are more prone to bribery risks, are not underrepresented. It allows for more precise estimates of compliance within each risk segment, and can highlight potential control weaknesses in specific high-risk areas. The selection of sample sizes within each stratum would typically be proportional to the size of the stratum, or sometimes oversampled if a stratum is deemed particularly critical. The ultimate goal is to achieve a sample that reflects the diversity of risk within the third-party population, enabling a more targeted and insightful audit of the due diligence process. Question 6. During an internal audit of an organization's anti-bribery management system, an auditor discovers that the risk assessment for the international sales division has significantly underestimated the bribery risks associated with engaging a new set of overseas agents. These agents operate in jurisdictions with a documented high prevalence of bribery, and the division's justification for the low-risk rating cites the agents established local relationships without further elaboration or evidence of due diligence. What is the most ethically responsible course of action for the internal auditor in this scenario, considering the principles of ISO 37001-2016? Option A. Accept the division's risk assessment at face value, assuming their local knowledge is sufficient, and focus the audit on other areas to maintain efficiency. Option B. Document the discrepancy as a minor observation and suggest a follow-up audit in 6 months to review the agent's performance. Option C. Conduct a detailed, independent investigation into the specific agents and their operating environments to gather objective evidence, and then report any identified control deficiencies or unaddressed risks to management. Option D. Recommend that the International Sales Division conduct a more thorough risk assessment in the future, without immediately escalating the current findings. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed, independent investigation into the specific agents and their operating environments to gather objective evidence, and then report any identified control deficiencies or unaddressed risks to management. Explanation: the core of ethical considerations in risk assessment for an anti-bribery management system, ABAMS, under ISO 37001-2016, lies in the auditor's approach to uncovering potential bribery risks, especially when faced with information that might be incomplete or deliberately obscured. Clause 8.3 of ISO 37001-2016, Risk Assessment, mandates that an organization shall determine the bribery risks it faces. An internal auditor's role is to verify the effectiveness of this process. When an auditor encounters a situation where a specific business unit's risk assessment appears to have overlooked or downplayed risks associated with high-risk third parties, despite their known engagement in regions with high corruption perception indices, the auditor must consider the ethical implications of their reporting. The auditor's primary ethical duty is to the integrity of the ABAMS and the organization's commitment to preventing bribery. Simply accepting the business unit's self-assessment without further scrutiny would be a dereliction of this duty. The auditor must consider the potential for bias or lack of diligence in the original assessment. Therefore, the most ethically sound and professionally responsible action is to thoroughly investigate the discrepancy, gather additional evidence, and report the findings objectively, highlighting the potential gap in the risk assessment process. This ensures that the ABAMS remains robust and that management is aware of all significant bribery risks, enabling them to implement appropriate controls. This approach aligns with the principles of professional skepticism and due diligence expected of an internal auditor. Question 7. Considering the foundational principles of ISO 37001-2016, what is the primary overarching objective an organization strives to achieve through the implementation and continuous improvement of its anti-bribery management system? Option A. To delegate all responsibility for anti-bribery compliance to an external third-party audit firm. Option B. Systematically embed an organizational culture that prevents, detects, and responds to bribery, thereby enhancing trust and operational integrity. Option C. To solely satisfy the minimum legal requirements of anti-bribery legislation in all jurisdictions where the organization operates. Option D. To achieve a competitive advantage by exclusively leveraging its anti-bribery credentials in marketing and sales efforts. The correct answer is B. To systematically embed an organizational culture that prevents, detects, and responds to bribery, thereby enhancing trust and operational integrity. Explanation. The purpose of an anti-bribery management system, ABMS, as defined by ISO 37001-2016, is to enable an organization to prevent, detect, and address bribery. This encompasses establishing, implementing, maintaining, and improving a system that aims to comply with anti-bribery laws and voluntary commitments applicable to the organization. The benefits of such a system extend beyond mere compliance. They foster a culture of integrity, enhance reputation, improve business relationships by demonstrating ethical conduct, and can lead to increased operational efficiency and reduced risk of financial penalties or reputational damage. Specifically, the standards framework supports the identification and assessment of bribery risks, the implementation of controls, and the continuous monitoring and review of the system's effectiveness. This proactive approach helps to embed ethical behavior throughout the organization, making it a fundamental aspect of its operations and strategic decision-making, thereby contributing to sustainable business practices and stakeholder trust. Question 8. During an internal audit of Veridian Corp's anti-bribery management system, a significant nonconformity was identified concerning inadequate due diligence on a third-party agent operating in a high-risk jurisdiction. The corrective action plan proposed by management involves providing additional training to the procurement team and updating the third-party due diligence checklist. As an internal auditor, what is the most critical aspect to verify during the follow-up process to ensure the effectiveness of this corrective action? Option A. Verification that the root cause analysis correctly identified the lack of specific training and the outdated checklist as the sole contributors to the nonconformity. Option B. Documentation that the nonconformity report has been closed out in the system and that the training materials have been archived for future reference. Option C. Confirmation that the updated checklist has been implemented and that the procurement team has completed the additional training, with evidence of their understanding of the revised due diligence requirements. Option D. A review of the third-party agent's performance records since the corrective action was implemented to ascertain if any new instances of questionable payments have occurred. The correct answer is C. Confirmation that the updated checklist has been implemented and that the procurement team has completed the additional training, with evidence of their understanding of the revised due diligence requirements. Explanation. The effectiveness of corrective actions is assessed by verifying that the root cause of a nonconformity has been addressed and that the corrective action taken has prevented recurrence. This involves a systematic review of the nonconformity, the proposed corrective action, and the evidence of implementation and impact. For an internal auditor, this means not just checking if an action was completed, but if it actually resolved the underlying issue and improved the anti-bribery management system. This includes examining records, interviewing personnel, and observing processes. The process of follow-up is crucial to ensure that the system is continually improved and that identified weaknesses are robustly rectified, aligning with the principles of ISO 37001-2016, which emphasizes a proactive and systematic approach to managing bribery risks. The auditor's role is to provide assurance that the organization's response to nonconformities is adequate and leads to genuine improvements in preventing bribery. Question 9. During an internal audit of an organization's ISO 37001-2016 anti-bribery management system, an auditor is interviewing a mid-level manager responsible for procurement in a high-risk jurisdiction. The manager initially provides very general answers about the company's policies on gifts and hospitality, stating that Everything is handled according to the rules. Gain a deeper understanding of the practical implementation and identify potential gaps. Which of the following interview techniques would be most effective for the auditor to employ? Option A. Ask leading questions designed to confirm pre-existing suspicions about potential bribery, such as, "You haven't been pressured to accept inappropriate gifts, have you?" to expedite the audit process. Option B. Focus solely on reviewing the documented policies and procedures, assuming that if they are comprehensive, the manager's understanding is less critical for audit purposes. Option C. Request specific examples of recent gifts or hospitality received or offered by the manager's department, asking for details on the approval process, documentation, and whether any follow-up actions were taken, while also inquiring about the rationale behind the company's policy on such matters. Option D. Immediately escalate concerns to senior management, citing the manager's vague responses as evidence of a systemic failure in the anti-bribery program, without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Request specific examples of recent gifts or hospitality received or offered by the manager's department, asking for details on the approval process, documentation, and whether any follow-up actions were taken, while also inquiring about the rationale behind the company's policy on such matters. Explanation. The core principle guiding an internal auditor's approach during interviews for an ISO 37001-2016 anti-bribery management system audit is to elicit factual information and assess compliance with the established system and relevant legislation, such as the UK Bribery Act 2010 or the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. This involves employing open-ended questions that encourage detailed responses, probing for specifics rather than accepting general assurances. The auditor must also be adept at identifying potential nonconformities or areas of weakness by listening for inconsistencies, evasiveness, or a lack of understanding regarding policies and procedures. A key aspect is to maintain a neutral and objective stance, creating an environment where the interviewee feels comfortable providing honest feedback without fear of reprisal. The auditor's role is not to accuse, but to gather evidence and understand the implementation of controls. Therefore, the most effective approach involves a combination of structured inquiry and adaptive questioning, focusing on observable behaviors and documented processes related to the anti-bribery system. This includes understanding how due diligence is performed on third parties, how gifts, hospitality, and expenses are managed, and how concerns are reported and investigated. The auditor must also be prepared to ask follow-up questions based on the interviewee's responses to clarify ambiguities and explore potential risks. Question 10. During an internal audit of a company's procurement department, an auditor is investigating the controls surrounding the engagement of foreign agents. The auditee, a procurement manager, provides a general overview of the process, stating that all third parties undergo a due diligence check. What is the most effective follow-up question an ISO 37001 internal auditor should employ to gather specific, actionable evidence regarding the rigor of this due diligence, particularly concerning potential bribery risks associated with foreign agents? Option A. What training do your team members receive on identifying bribery red flags during due diligence? Option B. Are there any exceptions to the due diligence process for foreign agents? Option C. Do you believe the current due diligence process is sufficient to prevent bribery risks? Option D. Could you walk me through the specific steps and documentation required for the due diligence of a foreign agent identified as high risk, including how adverse media and sanction lists are checked? The correct answer is D. Could you walk me through the specific steps and documentation required for the due diligence of a foreign agent identified as high risk, including how adverse media and sanction lists are checked? Explanation. The core of effective interviewing for an ISO 37001 internal auditor lies in eliciting truthful and comprehensive information, while maintaining objectivity and adhering to the principles of the standard. When auditing a department responsible for managing third-party relationships, an auditor needs to probe beyond superficial responses. Open-ended questions are crucial for encouraging detailed narratives, allowing the auditee to elaborate and reveal potential control weaknesses or noncompliance. For instance, asking, "Can you describe the process you follow when onboarding a new high-risk supplier?" is far more effective than a closed question like, "Do you follow the onboarding procedure?" The auditor must then actively listen, observe nonverbal cues, and use probing techniques such as asking for specific examples or clarification on particular steps. This approach helps to uncover the actual practices rather than just the documented procedures. Furthermore, an auditor must be prepared to adapt their questioning based on the responses received, demonstrating flexibility and a deep understanding of the anti-bribery management system's requirements, including due diligence, risk assessment, and the prohibition of bribery in all its forms as outlined in ISO 37001. The aim is to gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support conclusions about the effectiveness of the anti-bribery controls in place, ensuring that the system is not merely a set of documents, but is actively and effectively implemented. Question 11. When conducting an internal audit of an organization that has integrated its ISO 37001-2016 anti-bribery management system, ABAMS, with its ISO 9001-2015 quality management system, QMS, what is the primary focus for the auditor concerning the operation clause, Clause 8, of ISO 37001-2016? Option A. Assessing the effectiveness of the QMS's customer feedback mechanisms in capturing complaints related to bribery incidents, irrespective of their relevance to product quality. Option B. Evaluating how bribery risks are identified, assessed, and managed within the operational processes for product or service delivery, and how controls are integrated into the QMS's operational planning and control procedures. Option C. Confirming that the ABAMS documentation is cross-referenced in the QMS's process for document control and record management to ensure traceability. Option D. Verifying that the organization's documented quality policy explicitly mentions a zero-tolerance stance on bribery, as required by the QMS. The correct answer is B. Evaluating how bribery risks are identified, assessed, and managed within the operational processes for product or service delivery, and how controls are integrated into the QMS's operational planning and control procedures. Explanation. The integration of an anti-bribery management system, ABAMS, with other management systems, such as those for quality ISO 9001, or environmental management ISO 14001, is facilitated by the high-level structure HLS common to many ISO standards. This common structure, which includes clauses like context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement, allows for the consolidation of management system elements. When auditing an integrated system, an auditor must assess how the ABAMS requirements are incorporated into and complement the existing processes and controls of other systems. For instance, the risk assessment process for quality objectives might be expanded to include bribery risks, or the internal audit program for the quality system could be modified to incorporate specific checks for anti-bribery compliance. The key is to ensure that the ABAMS is not a standalone, disconnected system, but is woven into the fabric of the organization's overall management framework. This approach leverages existing resources and expertise, avoids duplication of effort, and promotes a more holistic approach to governance and compliance. An auditor would look for evidence of this integration in documentation, management reviews, internal audit reports, and the daily operational practices of the organization. The effectiveness of the integration is judged by whether the ABAMS requirements are met without compromising the objectives or effectiveness of the other integrated systems, and whether the integrated system as a whole demonstrates continual improvement in all its aspects, including anti-bribery. Question 12. When conducting an internal audit of an organization's ISO 37001-2016 anti-bribery management system, an auditor is reviewing the documented information retained to provide evidence of conformity with requirements related to due diligence on business associates. What aspect of documented information control would the auditor primarily focus on to ensure the integrity and usability of this evidence over time? Option A. Assessing the clarity and conciseness of the language used within the documented information for ease of understanding by external parties. Option B. Confirming that the documented information has undergone the most recent review and approval cycle as per the Documented Information Register. Option C. Ensuring the documented information is protected from loss of confidentiality, improper use, and loss of integrity, and is retrievable for the specified retention period. Option D. Verifying that the documented information is readily accessible to all personnel involved in the anti-bribery management system. Correct answer is C. ensuring the documented information is protected from loss of confidentiality, improper use, and loss of integrity, and is retrievable for the specified retention period. Explanation: the control of documented information in an anti-bribery management system, as per ISO 37001-2016, requires a systematic approach to ensure its availability, suitability, and protection. Clause 7.5.3. Control of documented information specifies the necessary controls. These controls include identification and description, format and medium, review and approval for suitability and adequacy, and availability and suitability for use. Furthermore, documented information must be protected, including protection from loss of confidentiality, improper use, or loss of integrity. For retained documented information, records, controls must also cover identification, storage, protection, retrieval, retention time, and disposition. An internal auditor's role is to verify that these controls are effectively implemented and maintained. This involves checking that documented information is accessible to those who need it, that it is current and accurate, and that there are safeguards against unauthorized changes or deletion. The question focuses on the auditor's verification process for documented information that needs to be retained to provide evidence of conformity. This implies checking that the documented information is not only available, but also preserved in a state that guarantees its integrity and can be retrieved when needed for future reference or audit purposes. Therefore, the auditor would primarily focus on the controls ensuring the protection and retrievability of this specific type of documented information. Question 13. During an internal audit of a multinational corporation's anti-bribery management system, an auditor is reviewing the effectiveness of the awareness programs. The company has conducted numerous training sessions, distributed policy documents, and implemented an online learning module accessible to all employees. While participation rates are high, and employees generally score well on post-training quizzes, the auditor observes a recent increase in reported incidents involving third-party due diligence failures and a concerning number of near-miss situations flagged internally. What key indicator should the auditor prioritize to assess the actual impact of the awareness programs on fostering an anti-bribery culture beyond mere knowledge acquisition? Option A. The average score achieved by employees on the post-training knowledge assessment quizzes. Option B. Analysis of the frequency and nature of reported bribery suspicions or concerns through the designated whistleblowing channels. Option C. The number of employees who have completed the online anti-bribery training module within the specified timeframe. Option D. The quantity of anti-bribery policy documents distributed to all organizational personnel. Correct answer is B. Analysis of the frequency and nature of reported bribery suspicions or concerns through the designated whistleblowing channels. Explanation: the effectiveness of an anti-bribery management system's communication and awareness programs is evaluated not just by the content delivered, but by its demonstrable impact on employee behavior and the organization's overall anti-bribery culture. ISO 37001, 2016 Clause 7. 3. Awareness mandates that personnel are aware of the anti-bribery policy and procedures and their role in preventing and detecting bribery. An internal auditor assessing the effectiveness of these programs must look beyond mere participation metrics. They need to ascertain if the awareness initiatives have led to a tangible reduction in identified bribery risks, an increase in the reporting of suspicious activities through established channels, and a demonstrable understanding of the consequences of noncompliance, as evidenced by improved decision-making in high-risk situations. This involves reviewing incident reports, internal audit findings related to bribery, employee feedback mechanisms, and potentially conducting targeted interviews or surveys that probe for practical application of the learned principles. The focus is on the systemic integration of anti-bribery awareness into daily operations and decision-making processes, rather than simply the dissemination of information. Question 14. When auditing the implementation of corrective actions following the discovery of a significant gap in the third-party due diligence process, what is the primary focus for an internal auditor in assessing the effectiveness of the implemented measures, such as updated training modules and revised screening protocols? Option A. Confirming that the training modules were delivered to all relevant personnel within the stipulated timeframe and that attendance records are complete. Option B. obtaining written confirmation from the department responsible for due diligence that they believe the issue has been resolved and that no further action is required. Option C. Verifying that the revised screening protocols have been consistently applied to all new third parties onboarded since the nonconformity was identified, and that post-implementation reviews show no recurrence of similar due diligence failures. Option D. Ensuring that the budget allocated for the corrective action was fully utilized, and that all documentation related to the action plan is archived. The correct answer is C. Verifying that the revised screening protocols have been consistently applied to all new third parties onboarded since the nonconformity was identified, and that post-implementation reviews show no recurrence of similar due diligence failures. Explanation: the effectiveness of corrective actions is assessed by verifying that the root cause of the nonconformity has been addressed and that the implemented action prevents recurrence. For an internal auditor reviewing the implementation of corrective actions, the focus is on the evidence of effectiveness, not merely the completion of the task. When a nonconformity is identified, such as a lapse in due diligence procedures for a high-risk third party, the corrective action might involve retraining staff and updating the due diligence checklist. The auditor's role in monitoring effectiveness involves examining records that demonstrate the updated checklist was consistently used for subsequent third parties and that no similar lapses have occurred. This includes reviewing new due diligence files for adherence to the updated procedures and analyzing the frequency of identified risks for newly onboarded third parties. The auditor also needs to confirm that the retraining has led to a demonstrable change in behavior or understanding, perhaps through post-training assessments or observed application of the new procedures. The goal is to ascertain that the corrective action has resolved the original problem and improved the overall anti-bribery control environment. This goes beyond simply checking if the retraining session occurred or if the checklist was updated. It requires a deeper dive into the outcomes and impacts of these actions on the organization's ability to prevent bribery. The auditor's report should detail the evidence gathered to support the conclusion on the effectiveness of the corrective action, referencing specific instances and data points. Question 15. Following an internal audit that identified a weakness in the procurement process where vendor background checks were inconsistently performed, the organization implemented a corrective action to mandate a standardized due diligence checklist for all new vendor onboarding. As an ISO 37001/2016 internal auditor, what is the most crucial aspect to verify when assessing the effectiveness of this corrective action? Option A. Interviewing procurement staff to gauge their understanding of the new due diligence requirements and their perceived ease of use of the checklist. Option B. Examining the audit trail of the electronic system used for vendor onboarding to ensure the checklist was digitally stored and accessible. Option C. Confirming that the updated due diligence checklist was formally approved by the compliance department and communicated to the procurement team. Option D. Reviewing a sample of vendor onboarding files initiated after the checklist implementation to confirm consistent application of the checklist and analysis of the resulting data for red flags. The correct answer is D. Reviewing a sample of vendor onboarding files initiated after the checklist implementation to confirm consistent application of the checklist and analysis of the resulting data for red flags. Explanation: when an internal auditor for an ISO 37001/2016 anti-bribery management system, ABAMS, assesses the effectiveness of corrective actions, they must verify that the action taken has actually resolved the identified nonconformity and prevented its recurrence. This involves more than just confirming the action was implemented. The auditor needs to gather objective evidence that the root cause has been addressed and that the control or process is now functioning as intended. For instance, if a nonconformity was identified regarding inadequate due diligence on a third party, a corrective action might be to update the due diligence questionnaire. Verify effectiveness. The auditor would review several completed due diligence processes that occurred after the update, checking if the new questionnaire was used, if the information gathered was more robust, and if any red flags were appropriately investigated and mitigated, thereby demonstrating the resolution of the original issue and the prevention of its recurrence. This verification aligns with the principles of continuous improvement inherent in management systems and the specific requirements of ISO 37001 for addressing nonconformities and ensuring the ABAMS remains effective. The auditor's role is to provide assurance to management that the implemented corrective actions are not merely superficial fixes, but substantive solutions that strengthen the organization's anti-bribery posture. Question 16. When evaluating the effectiveness of an organization's anti-bribery management system as an internal auditor, what fundamental principle of ISO 37001:2016 dictates that the design and implementation of controls must be directly related to the severity and likelihood of identified bribery risks, rather than being uniformly applied across all activities regardless of risk level? Option A, continual improvement. Option B, proportionality. Option C, due diligence. Option D, transparency. The correct answer is B, proportionality. Explanation. The principle of proportionality in ISO 37001:2016 relates to ensuring that the controls implemented within an anti-bribery management system are commensurate with the identified bribery risks. This means that the measures taken should be appropriate in scale and scope to the level of risk. For instance, a high-risk transaction or relationship would warrant more stringent due diligence and oversight than a low-risk one. This principle guides the selection and application of controls, such as policies, procedures, training, and due diligence processes, ensuring they are effective without being unduly burdensome or impractical. It also implies that the resources allocated to anti-bribery efforts should be aligned with the organization's risk profile and operational context. The aim is to achieve a balance between robust risk mitigation and operational efficiency, ensuring that the system is both effective in preventing bribery and sustainable in its implementation. This concept is crucial for an internal auditor to assess the adequacy and relevance of the controls in place relative to the organization's specific bribery risks. Question 17. During an internal audit of a multinational corporation's anti-bribery management system, an auditor reviews procedures related to minor payments made to expedite routine government actions. The organization operates in several countries where such facilitation payments are a common, albeit legally ambiguous, practice. What is the primary focus for the internal auditor when evaluating the organization's handling of these payments under ISO 37001:2016? Option A, confirming that the organization has completely prohibited all facilitation payments across all jurisdictions to eliminate any potential for bribery. Option B, assessing the financial value of each facilitation payment to ensure it falls below a predefined materiality threshold set by the company's legal department. Option C, verifying that documented policies and procedures are in place to identify, approve, record, and control these payments, ensuring they are not used to improperly influence officials and are distinct from bribes. Option D, investigating the historical frequency and specific amounts of all past facilitation payments to identify any patterns of potential corruption. The correct answer is C, verifying that documented policies and procedures are in place to identify, approve, record, and control these payments, ensuring they are not used to improperly influence officials and are distinct from bribes. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 37001:2016 regarding facilitation payments is that while the standard acknowledges their existence in some jurisdictions, it mandates that organizations must have clear policies and procedures to prevent them from being disguised bribes. An internal auditor's role is to verify that the organization's anti-bribery policy and procedures are effectively implemented, and that any permitted facilitation payments are documented, transparent, and strictly controlled, to ensure they do not violate anti-bribery laws or the spirit of the standard. The auditor must assess if the organization has established criteria for identifying and approving such payments, if they are recorded accurately, and if there are mechanisms to ensure they are not used to improperly influence decisions. The auditor's objective is to confirm that the controls in place are sufficient to mitigate the risk of bribery, even when these payments are legally permissible. The focus is on the control and transparency of these payments, not their outright prohibition if legally allowed and minor in nature, but rather on ensuring they are not a conduit for corruption. Therefore, the most critical aspect for an auditor to verify is the existence and effectiveness of documented procedures that govern these payments and ensure compliance with both the standard and applicable anti-bribery legislation, such as the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act FCPA, or the UK Bribery Act, which have specific provisions or interpretations concerning such payments. Question 18. A regional manager for a global logistics firm has been granted significant discretionary authority over project development funds. An internal audit review of the firm's anti-bribery management system identifies a potential vulnerability: the lack of specific oversight and detailed justification requirements for the disbursement of these discretionary funds, creating a risk that they could be misused to facilitate illicit payments to secure favorable port access. What is the most effective preventive action to address this identified systemic risk? Option A. Conduct a mandatory refresher training session for all regional managers on the company's anti-bribery policy and the legal ramifications of bribery under relevant jurisdictions, such as the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Option B. Mandate that all discretionary funds exceeding a nominal threshold must be directly managed by the Central Finance Department, thereby removing the regional manager's authority over their disbursement. Option C. Implement a rigorous due diligence process for the allocation and use of all discretionary project funds, requiring detailed justification, approval by a higher authority, and periodic audits of fund utilization. Option D. Revise the regional manager's performance appraisal criteria to include a specific metric for the responsible management of discretionary funds, with consequences for any identified mismanagement. The correct answer is C. Implement a rigorous due diligence process for the allocation and use of all discretionary project funds, requiring detailed justification, approval by a higher authority, and periodic audits of fund utilization. Explanation: the scenario describes a potential risk of bribery through the use of discretionary project funds allocated to a regional manager. ISO 37001, 2016 Clause 8. 2. Due diligence, and Clause 8. 3. Controls for business associates are directly relevant to managing risks associated with third parties and business dealings. Preventive actions aim to eliminate the cause of a potential nonconformity. In this case, the potential nonconformity is the misuse of discretionary funds for bribery. The most effective preventive action would be to establish a robust due diligence process for the allocation and oversight of these funds, ensuring that the purpose, beneficiaries, and expenditure are transparent and aligned with the anti-bribery policy. This involves assessing the integrity of the regional manager and the controls surrounding the fund's use, implementing a clear policy on the use of discretionary funds, requiring detailed justification and approval for each allocation, and conducting periodic audits of fund usage are crucial steps. The key is to proactively identify and mitigate the risk before any bribe is solicited or paid, focusing on the regional manager's past performance or general awareness training, while important, does not directly address the systemic risk posed by the discretionary fund mechanism itself. A change in the fund structure or a complete elimination of discretionary funds would be a more significant risk mitigation strategy, but within the context of an internal audit finding that requires a preventive action. Strengthening the existing process through due diligence and oversight is the most appropriate immediate step to prevent the potential nonconformity. The question asks for a preventive action, which is forward-looking and designed to stop something from happening. Question 19. An internal auditor reviewing the anti-bribery management system of Veridian Dynamics discovered that a key overseas distributor, Apex Solutions, was onboarded without the requisite enhanced due diligence, despite operating in a high-risk jurisdiction and involving significant transaction volumes. The auditor's report highlights this as a nonconformity against Clause 7. 2. 3 of ISO 37001-2016. To address this, Veridian Dynamics Management needs to develop a corrective action plan. Which of the following approaches for the corrective action plan would be most effective in ensuring the nonconformity is addressed and prevented from recurring? Option A. Update the organization's code of conduct to vaguely mention the importance of due diligence and rely on the existing audit schedule to identify similar issues in the future. Option B. Conduct a one-time awareness session on anti-bribery risks for the procurement team and document the findings of the current audit as a learning point without further procedural changes. Option C. Implement a mandatory refresher training program for all personnel involved in third-party onboarding, focusing on the specific requirements of ISO 37001, 2016 Clause 7. 2. 3. Revise the third-party due diligence procedure to include a mandatory risk-based escalation protocol for high-risk engagements, and assign a senior compliance officer to oversee the immediate completion of enhanced due diligence for Apex solutions within 30 days. Option D. Issue a formal warning to the department responsible for third-party onboarding and require them to document the due diligence steps for Apex solutions retrospectively within the next quarter. The correct answer is C. Implement a mandatory refresher training program for all personnel involved in third-party onboarding, focusing on the specific requirements of ISO 37001, 2016 Clause 7. 2. 3. Revise the third-party due diligence procedure to include a mandatory risk-based escalation protocol for high-risk engagements, and assign a senior compliance officer to oversee the immediate completion of enhanced due diligence for Apex solutions within 30 days. Explanation. The scenario involves an internal auditor identifying a nonconformity during an audit of an organization's anti-bribery management system, specifically concerning the due diligence process for third parties. The nonconformity indicates that a significant business partner, identified as Globocorp, was engaged without adequate risk assessment and due diligence, potentially exposing the organization to bribery risks. ISO 37001, 2016, Clause 7. 2. 3. Mandates that an organization shall conduct due diligence on persons or entities acting on its behalf, proportionate to the bribery risks identified. When a nonconformity is found, the organization must take action to control and correct it. This involves a root cause analysis to understand why the nonconformity occurred. For instance, if the due diligence process was not followed, the root cause might be a lack of training, unclear procedures, or insufficient resources allocated to the compliance function responsible for due diligence. Developing a corrective action plan requires addressing this root cause. The plan should detail the actions to be taken, the responsibilities for implementing these actions, the time frame for completion, and the method for verifying the effectiveness of the corrective actions. In this case, the corrective action should focus on rectifying the immediate issue with Globocorp, such as performing the overdue due diligence and implementing systemic changes to prevent recurrence. This might include revising the due diligence procedure, providing enhanced training to relevant personnel on risk assessment and due diligence requirements, and potentially implementing automated checks or oversight mechanisms. The effectiveness of the corrective action is crucial. It must demonstrate that the identified nonconformity has been resolved and that the risk of recurrence has been mitigated. This aligns with the principles of continuous improvement inherent in management systems. Question 20. An internal auditor is reviewing the anti-bribery controls at a multinational corporation that operates in several countries with varying corruption perceptions indexes. The auditor is focusing on the organization's processes for engaging third-party consultants who facilitate market entry and business development. During the audit, it is observed that the due diligence conducted on these consultants is largely standardized, relying on publicly available information and a generic questionnaire, irrespective of the consultant's role, the risk associated with the specific market, or the value of the contracts involved. The auditor identifies that several consultants operate in jurisdictions with high bribery risks and have significant influence over government contracts. Which of the following findings would represent the most significant deficiency in the organization's anti-bribery management system, specifically concerning the understanding and control of bribery risks within its processes? Option A. The organization's code of conduct does not clearly define the responsibilities of employees regarding the reporting of suspected bribery incidents, creating ambiguity in the reporting chain. Option B. The internal audit team has not received specific training on identifying bribery red flags in financial transactions, limiting their ability to detect potential illicit payments during transaction reviews. Option C. The organization does not have a documented policy explicitly prohibiting the offering of gifts and hospitality to foreign public officials, a common practice in some of the markets where consultants operate. Option D. The due diligence process for third-party consultants lacks a risk-based approach, failing to adequately scrutinize intermediaries operating in high-risk jurisdictions or those with substantial influence over contract awards, thus not effectively managing bribery risks. Correct answer is D. The due diligence process for third-party consultants lacks a risk-based approach, failing to adequately scrutinize intermediaries operating in high-risk jurisdictions or those with substantial influence over contract awards, thus not effectively managing bribery risks. Explanation: the core of an internal audit within an ISO 37001-2016 framework, particularly concerning the understanding of the auditee's organization and processes, lies in the auditor's ability to identify potential bribery risks embedded within those processes. Clause 8.2 of ISO 37001-2016, due diligence, mandates that an organization shall perform due diligence on its business associates to manage bribery risks. This due diligence process involves assessing the likelihood of bribery occurring through or with a particular associate. The effectiveness of this assessment is directly tied to the auditor's comprehension of the specific activities and relationships involved. For instance, understanding how a company's procurement department interacts with suppliers, including the approval workflows, payment mechanisms, and the types of benefits that can be exchanged, is crucial. If the due diligence process for third-party intermediaries, who operate in high-risk jurisdictions and have significant influence over contract awards, is found to be superficial, lacking specific checks on their reputation, background, and the nature of their engagement, this represents a significant control weakness. Such a weakness means the organization is not adequately identifying or mitigating the risk of bribery associated with these intermediaries. Therefore, the auditor's role is to evaluate whether the organization's processes, including due diligence, are designed and implemented to effectively identify and manage bribery risks in line with the standards requirements. A process that fails to scrutinize high-risk relationships adequately would be a nonconformity. Question 21. During an internal audit of a multinational corporation's anti-bribery management system, an auditor discovers that a significant business partner in a jurisdiction with a high corruption perception index was onboarded without undergoing the enhanced due diligence procedures mandated by the organization's policy. The policy states that enhanced due diligence is required for third parties operating in high-risk environments. Analysis of the situation reveals that the individual responsible for initiating the onboarding process was unaware of the specific risk classification for the partner's country. What is the most likely root cause of this nonconformity, considering the principles of ISO 37001-2016? Option A. There was a general lack of awareness among all employees regarding the importance of anti-bribery compliance in international business dealings. Option B. The employee responsible for initiating the onboarding process failed to consult the company's internal risk register before proceeding with the partner engagement. Option C. The IT system used for partner onboarding did not automatically flag the partner's country as high risk, thereby failing to prompt the necessary due diligence. Option D. The anti-bribery policy lacked specific, actionable guidance regarding the risk classification thresholds and triggers for mandatory, enhanced due diligence in relation to geographic risk assessments. Correct answer is D. The anti-bribery policy lacked specific, actionable guidance regarding the risk classification thresholds and triggers for mandatory enhanced due diligence in relation to geographic risk assessments. Explanation: the core of root cause analysis for nonconformities within an ISO 37001-2016 framework, particularly concerning bribery and corruption risks, lies in moving beyond immediate symptoms to identify fundamental systemic failures. When an internal audit uncovers a deviation from established anti-bribery procedures, such as a failure to conduct adequate due diligence on a third-party intermediary in a high-risk jurisdiction like a country with weak anti-corruption laws, the internal auditor must probe deeper. Simply noting that due diligence was not performed is a description of the nonconformity. The root cause analysis aims to answer why it wasn't performed. This could stem from a lack of clarity in the procedure itself regarding the specific thresholds for enhanced due diligence, insufficient training provided to the personnel responsible for conducting it, a systemic issue with the IT system used to track due diligence status, or even a cultural pressure to expedite business processes that inadvertently bypass compliance steps. The goal is to find the underlying reason that, if corrected, would prevent recurrence. For instance, if the procedure was unclear, the root cause might be a poorly defined risk assessment matrix or inadequate communication of policy updates. If training was insufficient, the root cause could be a gap in the competency assessment process for employees in critical roles. The process involves asking why multiple times, often referred to as the 5 whys technique. But it can also involve more structured methodologies like fishbone diagrams or fault tree analysis, all aimed at pinpointing the systemic flaw that allowed the nonconformity to occur. The most effective root cause is one that addresses the fundamental breakdown in the anti-bribery management system, ensuring that corrective actions taken are preventative and not merely reactive. Therefore, identifying that the policy lacks specific guidance on risk-based due diligence for high-risk regions directly addresses the systemic flaw in the control framework, which is the most fundamental cause. Question 22. During an internal audit of a multinational corporation's anti-bribery management system, an auditor is assessing the effectiveness of the due diligence procedures for engaging new suppliers in emerging markets. The corporation's policy requires a basic background check and a signed integrity declaration. However, the auditor notes that the company frequently bypasses these steps for smaller, less strategic suppliers to expedite onboarding. Considering the principles of ISO 37001, 2016, and the potential for bribery, which of the following would represent the most significant gap in the due diligence process? Option A. The absence of a risk-based approach to due diligence, leading to inconsistent application across different supplier tiers and transaction values. Option B. The omission of ongoing monitoring of supplier performance and compliance after the initial onboarding phase. Option C. The failure to conduct independent financial background checks on all new suppliers, regardless of their size. Option D. The reliance on signed integrity declarations without independent verification of their content. The correct answer is A. The absence of a risk-based approach to due diligence, leading to inconsistent application across different supplier tiers and transaction values. Explanation. The core of identifying potential bribery risks within an organization, particularly under ISO 37001-2016, lies in understanding the various touchpoints and relationships that could be exploited. Clause 8. 3. Due diligence is central to this. Due diligence involves a systematic process of assessing and managing bribery risks associated with an organization's personnel, business associates, and business activities. When an internal auditor is evaluating the effectiveness of these due diligence procedures, they must consider how the organization identifies and assesses individuals or entities that might pose a heightened risk. This includes evaluating the criteria used to screen third parties, the depth of background checks, and the ongoing monitoring of these relationships. Factors such as the nature of the business activity, the geographical location of operations, especially in countries with high perceived corruption levels, the role of intermediaries, and the potential for discretionary decision-making by individuals involved are all critical risk indicators. The auditor's focus should be on whether the organization has a robust framework to proactively identify and mitigate these risks before they materialize into actual bribery incidents. This proactive approach, grounded in thorough due diligence, is a cornerstone of an effective anti-bribery management system. Question 23. An internal auditor is reviewing the records pertaining to the due diligence of third parties as part of an ISO 37001-2016 ABAMS audit. The organization's policy mandates a risk-based approach to due diligence, with varying levels of scrutiny applied depending on the assessed risk. What specific aspect of the reviewed documentation and records would be most indicative of the ABAMS effective implementation concerning third-party due diligence? Option A. A comprehensive log detailing the total number of third parties engaged and the cumulative expenditure on all due diligence activities conducted during the audit period. Option B. Evidence that the documented due diligence process, including risk assessment and its outcome, has been applied and recorded for a representative sample of third parties. Option C. The presence of standardized, generic due diligence questionnaires that have been distributed to all third parties, irrespective of their risk profile. Option D. Records demonstrating that all third parties have undergone the highest level of due diligence, regardless of their identified risk category or the potential for bribery. The correct answer is B. Evidence that the documented due diligence process, including risk assessment and its outcome, has been applied and recorded for a representative sample of third parties. Explanation. The internal auditor's role in reviewing documentation and records for an anti-bribery management system ABAMS under ISO 37001-2016 involves assessing the effectiveness and compliance of the implemented controls. When examining records related to due diligence on third parties, the auditor must verify that the process documented in the ABAM's procedures is actually being followed. This includes checking for evidence of risk assessment for each third party, the level of due diligence performed based on that risk, and the documented outcome of the due diligence, such as approval, rejection, or the imposition of specific conditions. The record should demonstrate that the organization is actively managing the bribery risks associated with its third-party relationships, aligning with the requirements of Clause 7.2 of the standard. The auditor is not primarily looking for the total number of third parties or the cost of due diligence, but rather the completeness and adequacy of the due diligence process as evidenced by the records for a representative sample of third parties. Therefore, verifying that the documented due diligence process has been applied and recorded for a given third party, including risk assessment and outcome, is the most critical aspect of the audit review. Question 24. Consider a scenario where an internal auditor is preparing to conduct an opening meeting for an ISO 37001-2016 anti-bribery management system audit of a multinational corporation subsidiary in Singapore. The subsidiary has significant dealings with government entities in Southeast Asia. Which of the following elements is the most critical to confirm during this initial meeting to ensure the audit's effectiveness and adherence to the standard's principles? Option A. The precise scope of the audit, including specific departments, processes, and geographical locations to be covered, along with confirmation of the auditee's understanding of the audit criteria, which encompasses ISO 37001-2016 and relevant local anti-bribery legislation such as Singapore's Prevention of Corruption Act. Option B. A detailed review of all recent third-party due diligence reports conducted by the subsidiary, ensuring their completeness and compliance with internal policies. Option C. An immediate discussion of potential nonconformities identified during preliminary document review, focusing on areas of high risk related to facilitation payments in the region. Option D. A comprehensive presentation of the auditor's preliminary risk assessment for the subsidiary, outlining specific bribery risks anticipated during the audit engagement. The correct answer is A. The precise scope of the audit, including specific departments, processes, and geographical locations to be covered, along with confirmation of the auditee's understanding of the audit criteria, which encompasses ISO 37001-2016 and relevant local anti-bribery legislation such as Singapore's Prevention of Corruption Act. Explanation: the opening meeting for an internal audit of an anti-bribery management system, as per ISO 37001-2016 principles, serves as a crucial communication bridge between the audit team and the auditee management. Its primary purpose is to establish a collaborative environment, confirm the audit scope and objectives, and ensure that the auditee understands the process and their role. A key element is to confirm the availability of necessary resources, such as personnel and documentation, and to outline the audit plan, including the timeline and key personnel to be interviewed. Furthermore, it provides an opportunity to address any initial concerns or clarify misunderstandings regarding the audit's approach. The auditor must clearly state the purpose of the audit, which is to assess the conformity and effectiveness of the anti-bribery management system against the requirements of ISO 37001-2016 and relevant organizational policies. Discussing the audit criteria, which includes the standard itself, internal procedures, and applicable legal and regulatory frameworks like the UK Bribery Act 2010 or the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, is essential for setting expectations. The opening meeting is not the forum for presenting findings or detailed conclusions, as these are reserved for the closing meeting. Its focus is on setting the stage for a productive and efficient audit process. Question 25. During an internal audit of an organization's anti-bribery management system, an auditor is observing the process for engaging a new third-party intermediary in a jurisdiction identified as high risk for bribery. The documented procedure requires a comprehensive due diligence review, including background checks and verification of the intermediary's reputation and business practices, before contract finalization. The auditor observes the procurement officer discussing the potential engagement with the intermediary's representative. What is the primary objective of the auditor in observing this interaction, and the subsequent documentation review related to this engagement. Option A. To verify that the established due diligence procedures for third-party intermediaries are being consistently followed and that objective evidence supports the engagement decision. Option B. To confirm that the intermediary's proposed service fees are competitive with other market providers without regard to the due diligence process. Option C. To assess the negotiation skills of the procurement officer and the intermediary's representative to ensure favorable commercial terms. Option D. To provide immediate feedback to the procurement officer on how to improve the efficiency of the third-party onboarding process. The correct answer is A. To verify that the established due diligence procedures for third-party intermediaries are being consistently followed and that objective evidence supports the engagement decision. Explanation. The fundamental principle of observing activities and processes within an anti-bribery management system, as guided by ISO 37001-2016, is to verify the effective implementation and operation of controls designed to prevent, detect, and address bribery. An internal auditor's role is to gather objective evidence. When observing the process of engaging a third-party intermediary for a high-risk market, the auditor needs to assess whether the established due diligence procedures, as outlined in the organization's policy and documented in the system, are being followed in practice. This involves looking for evidence that the intermediary's background has been vetted, that the contractual terms include anti-bribery clauses, and that the selection process was based on documented criteria, not informal or potentially corrupt influences. The auditor must ascertain if the documented procedures are being applied consistently, and if any deviations are properly justified and approved. The focus is on the observable actions and the adherence to the established anti-bribery controls. This direct observation provides a crucial layer of assurance that the system is functioning as intended, complementing documentary evidence. The auditor is not there to dictate the process, but to confirm its conformity with the system and relevant legal obligations, such as those found in the UK Bribery Act or the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which mandate robust due diligence and ethical conduct in business dealings. Question 26. Assessment of the situation at Veridian Dynamics reveals that their internal audit team is preparing to evaluate the company's adherence to its ISO 37001-2016 certified anti-bribery management system. Considering the core principles and objectives of internal auditing as defined by the standard, which statement best articulates the fundamental purpose of this impending audit activity? Option A. Determine if the anti-bribery management system conforms to the organization's own specified requirements and the requirements of ISO 37001-2016, and if it is effectively implemented and maintained. Option B. To assess the overall profitability and market share growth attributed to the successful implementation of anti-bribery controls. Option C. To quantify the financial losses incurred due to attempted or successful bribery incidents over the past fiscal year. Option D. To verify that all employees have completed the mandatory anti-bribery awareness training modules by their designated deadlines. The correct answer is A. To determine if the anti-bribery management system conforms to the organization's own specified requirements and the requirements of ISO 37001-2016, and if it is effectively implemented and maintained. Explanation. The primary purpose of an internal audit within an ISO 37001-2016 framework is to provide an independent and objective assessment of the effectiveness of the organization's anti-bribery management system ABAMS. This involves evaluating whether the ABAMS conforms to the organization's own requirements for the ABAMS and to the requirements of ISO 37001-2016. Crucially, it also assesses whether the ABAMS is effectively implemented and maintained. This evaluation aims to identify areas of nonconformity, weaknesses in controls, and opportunities for improvement in preventing, detecting, and responding to bribery. It is not primarily about validating the financial performance of specific business units, nor is it solely focused on identifying instances of bribery itself, although such findings may arise. The audit also serves to ensure that the ABAMS is integrated into the organization's business processes, and that the specified anti-bribery policies and procedures are being followed in practice across all relevant functions and levels of the organization. The objective is to provide management with assurance regarding the ABM's compliance and operational efficiency in mitigating bribery risks. Question 27. An internal auditor is examining the implementation of due diligence procedures for third-party intermediaries within an organization that has adopted ISO 37001-2016. The auditor is reviewing a specific intermediary who was engaged last fiscal year. Which of the following would constitute the most robust objective evidence to support the auditor's conclusion regarding the effectiveness of the due diligence process for this intermediary? Option A. A signed statement from the sales manager confirming that the intermediary was vetted thoroughly before engagement. Option B. An email exchange between the compliance officer and the intermediary requesting additional information during the due diligence process. Option C. A copy of the intermediary's company registration documents and a general policy statement from the intermediary regarding ethical business practices. Option D. Records confirming the completion of the intermediary's background check, a documented risk assessment of the intermediary based on the due diligence findings, and evidence of management approval for engagement following the assessment. The correct answer is D. Records confirming the completion of the intermediary's background check, a documented risk assessment of the intermediary based on the due diligence findings, and evidence of management approval for engagement following the assessment. Explanation. The core of an internal audit for an anti-bribery management system, as guided by ISO 37001-2016, lies in the auditor's ability to gather objective evidence. Objective evidence is factual information that can be proven true through observation, examination, or analysis. When assessing the effectiveness of controls related to due diligence on business associates, an auditor would look for evidence that demonstrates the process was followed and that the outcomes of the due diligence were recorded and acted upon. This involves reviewing documentation such as completed due diligence questionnaires, background check reports, risk assessments of potential associates, and records of decisions made based on these findings. Furthermore, interviews with personnel involved in the due diligence process can provide corroborating evidence, but this is typically considered subjective evidence unless directly supported by documented facts. The presence of a signed declaration from a business associate is also a form of objective evidence, confirming their commitment to anti-bribery principles. However, the most robust objective evidence directly addresses the process of due diligence and its outcomes, which includes verifying that the identified risks were properly mitigated or accepted and documented. The absence of any documented follow-up actions on a high-risk business associate, despite the due diligence report highlighting significant concerns, would indicate a potential nonconformity. Therefore, evidence that confirms the existence and execution of documented procedures for due diligence and the subsequent actions taken based on its findings represents the strongest form of objective evidence for this aspect of the audit. Question 28. When conducting an internal audit of a multinational corporation's anti-bribery management system, what specific action by top management would most strongly indicate a genuine commitment to ISO 37001-2016 principles beyond merely issuing a policy statement? Option A. Publicly acknowledging the importance of ethical conduct in annual reports while not embedding specific anti-bribery performance metrics into executive compensation. Option B. Allocating dedicated financial and human resources for the ongoing training and development of personnel on anti-bribery compliance, and actively participating in high-level risk assessment reviews. Option C. Relying solely on external legal counsel to define the organization's risk appetite concerning bribery and corruption. Option D. Delegating the entire responsibility for the anti-bribery management system to the compliance department without direct involvement in strategic decision-making. Correct answer is B. Allocating dedicated financial and human resources for the ongoing training and development of personnel on anti-bribery compliance, and actively participating in high-level risk assessment reviews. Explanation. The principle of leadership and commitment within ISO 37001-2016 is foundational. Top management's active involvement and visible support are crucial for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the anti-bribery management system. This commitment is demonstrated through various actions, including ensuring the availability of resources, communicating the importance of the system, and fostering a culture where ethical conduct is paramount. When an internal auditor assesses leadership commitment, they look for evidence that top management has integrated anti-bribery considerations into the organization's strategic planning and business processes. This involves understanding the organization's context, identifying interested parties and their requirements, and setting clear anti-bribery objectives. The auditor would seek evidence of management's role in defining the anti-bribery policy, assigning responsibilities, and ensuring that the system's performance is reviewed. The effectiveness of the system is directly tied to the degree of commitment shown by those at the highest levels, influencing employee behavior and the overall ethical tone of the organization. This commitment is not merely stated, but must be actively manifested through decision-making and resource allocation. Question 29. Considering the principles of ISO 37001-2016 and the role of an internal auditor, what is the fundamental purpose of the audit report generated after an assessment of an organization's anti-bribery management system, specifically in relation to communicating the audit's findings and their implications for the system's effectiveness? Option A. To formally document the audit's outcomes, including evidence of conformity and nonconformity with the anti-bribery management system, and to propose recommendations for enhancement. Option B. To provide a comprehensive historical record of all audit activities conducted, irrespective of their findings or relevance to the current system's performance. Option C. To offer a detailed critique of individual auditor performance, focusing on their adherence to audit methodologies and personal observations. Option D. To serve as a legal document for regulatory bodies, detailing all instances of potential bribery identified during the audit period. Correct answer is A. To formally document the audit's outcomes, including evidence of conformity and nonconformity with the anti-bribery management system, and to propose recommendations for enhancement. Explanation. The core purpose of an internal audit report within an ISO 37001-2016 framework is to communicate the findings of the audit process to relevant stakeholders, including management and potentially the certification body. This communication must be objective, factual, and actionable. Clause 8. 3 of ISO 37001-2016 specifies the requirements for conducting internal audits. While the standard does not prescribe a rigid, universally mandated format for the audit report, it does imply certain essential components. These components are designed to provide a clear understanding of the audit's scope, objectives, the evidence gathered, the conformity or nonconformity with the anti-bribery management system requirements, and recommendations for improvement. An internal audit report serves as a critical feedback mechanism, highlighting areas of strength and weakness in the organization's anti-bribery controls and processes. It should enable management to make informed decisions regarding corrective actions and system enhancements. The report's findings are derived directly from the audit evidence collected during the on-site or remote examination of processes and documentation. The conclusion synthesizes these findings in relation to the audit objectives and the standards requirements. Therefore, the most appropriate and encompassing description of the primary purpose of an internal audit report in this context is to document the audit's outcomes, including evidence of conformity and nonconformity, and to provide recommendations for improvement. Question 30. Considering the foundational principles and objectives of ISO 37001-2016, which outcome most directly reflects the primary strategic advantage gained by an organization that successfully implements and maintains a comprehensive anti-bribery management system? Option A. Complete immunity from all legal and regulatory scrutiny related to financial transactions and business dealings. Option B. A quantifiable reduction in operational costs solely attributable to streamlined internal audit processes. Option C. Enhanced global reputation and stakeholder trust through demonstrated ethical governance and compliance assurance. Option D. The automatic disqualification of competitors from bidding on projects where the organization is also a participant. Correct answer is C. Enhance global reputation and stakeholder trust through demonstrated ethical governance and compliance assurance. Explanation. The core purpose of establishing an anti-bribery management system, ABMS, aligned with ISO 37001-2016, is to enable an organization to prevent, detect, and respond to bribery. This systematic approach provides a framework for implementing controls and processes that mitigate the risk of bribery occurring within or on behalf of the organization. A key benefit of this robust framework is the enhancement of the organization's reputation and credibility, both domestically and internationally. By demonstrating a commitment to ethical conduct and compliance with anti-bribery laws such as the UK Bribery Act 2010 or the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act (FCPA), companies can build trust with stakeholders, including customers, investors, suppliers, and regulatory bodies. This improved trust can lead to stronger business relationships, increased market access, and a more stable financial performance. Furthermore, a well-implemented ABAMS can reduce the likelihood of costly investigations, legal penalties, and reputational damage that can arise from bribery incidents. It fosters a culture of integrity and accountability throughout the organization, which is fundamental to sustainable business practices.